Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I'm here today to do something that will hopefully be fun. I want to talk about 6 of my literary or bookish pet peeves and 6 literary or bookish things that I love. I've seen sort of versions of this idea going around on BookTube, or at least in my corner of BookTube, over the last few weeks or months. And originally I had sort of dismissed the idea of me doing a version of this video because I tend to adopt a sort of live and let live attitude. But over time, for some reason, the concept had just sort of burrowed into my brain and I kept kind of thinking about it. And over time started to think about or think of some pet peeves I have that are fair and are valid and things that exist and that don't necessarily denigrate things that other people might like. Like, one thing I really didn't want to do with a type of video like this is try to insult what somebody else likes. Like, if you like a particular type of book or anything like that, I am not here to pee in your pool, and I just didn't want to do a version of this video that would kind of go along with that. So I think I found a good solution to that. And let's start with the pet peeves. Let's get the negative out of the way, and then we will talk about the things that I like and go from there. And I would love to hear your literary pet peeves, again, hopefully that are respectful of other people and what other people like, in the comment section down below. And if you agree with any of mine, let me know that in the comment section down below. And if you'd like to do your own version of this, if you have a channel, feel free to go ahead and do so. The first pet peeve I want to talk about is the one that actually finally inspired me to do this video. And to do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. So we were in Pullman, Washington twice this year, 3 times this year, actually, because that is where my dog Jamie has been treated for a nasal tumor. Her oncologist is there and they have the setup to do it. Anyway, there is a fantastic used bookstore in Pullman called Bruised Books. I spent a lot of time in there going around finding fun things, but it kind of built into this sort of irritation I have with the way some bookstores are set up. And my local used bookstore, which is called Book Exchange, actually does the same thing. So it kind of popped into my head in Bruised Books and then was really hammered in over the last 2 or 3 weeks since I've been home, and I've gone to Book Exchange a couple of times and, tried to do my usual round because I have a routine when I go in there. We'll get into it. The thing that I really don't like is when bookstores have separate sections for fiction and for either literature or literary fiction, things like that. I don't like it. First of all, it's really annoying to me as a browser because I feel like I need to look through both sections. It's really difficult to tell what author or what book belongs in which section. So I end up having to look through both because I tend to read mostly fiction, or what people call literary fiction. And actually, an extension of this complaint could be just the term literary fiction at all, because I feel like when you have a literature section or a literary fiction section, it's exactly what I don't like about the term, which is that it is used to imply like, this is the serious literature. These are the books that you need to take seriously, and these are just kind of, fluff. It's the fiction. And it feels like it creates this hierarchical idea of what quality fiction is, and I don't like that. And the way the distinctions are made between the sections is interesting, sometimes feels kind of arbitrary, and I think sometimes it reveals a lot about forms of fiction that we don't take seriously or have been taught not to take seriously. And for example, I've been doing this Pulitzer Prize project. I'm reading all of the books that have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. In that journey, I have decided that I wanted to own a copy of every book that has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. This gets complicated in stores that have a fiction section and a literature section because you have to check both. So I have a running list on my phone of used books I want to look for, and some of them are like Pulitzer books. At this point, it's Pulitzer books that I don't have a hardcover of. And when I go into my local used bookstore, the fiction section is usually the one I see first. So I kind of go through there just to make sure, check on the authors that I know are in that section, and then I go around to the literature section and I kind of work my way through there, and then I can just circle and out the door. And it's annoying to have to do that whole process when I could just go to one section. And the reason I have to do that is that 3 Pulitzer authors are in fiction, but the rest of them are in literature. And the 3 that are in fiction, again, I think reveal a lot. It's Ann Tyler, Jane Smiley, and James Michener. The reason I say it reveals a lot is Jane Smiley and Ann Tyler, very popular authors, Ann Tyler more so than Jane Smiley, but definitely have been popular authors. Both of them have won a Pulitzer Prize. Ann Tyler for Breathing Lessons. Ann Tyler was also a finalist for Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant and The Accidental Tourist, I believe. Jane Smiley won for 1,000 Acres. But their fiction, which tends to center female characters and tends to focus on like family issues and things like that, is shelved in fiction and not literature. Perhaps unintentionally, it promotes this idea that the type of things that they write about aren't as serious as literature, or like what Michael Chabon writes about, or any of those things. And I disagree with that. And when you come to James Michener, he tends to write more sort of adventure stories. So he's there because he flirts with genre conventions that people think shouldn't be taken seriously. And I just think that's kind of unfortunate. Larry McMurtry is in a different section as well, but that kind of makes sense because they have a Western section. And Larry McMurtry has not only written Westerns, but Lonesome Dove is a Western, Horsemen Pass By is a Western, so okay, fine. But then you see some other things, like if you separate other sections out, like historical fiction is a section that they have at Book Exchange, and Edna Ferber, an author I have been collecting, is in historical fiction. She was writing books in the early 1900s, like the 19-teens, the 1920s, and the 1930s. And most of the books that she wrote were contemporary to that time. Some of them, like I think Showboat, starts around 1880 and works its way up to the 1920s when it was published. I guess that's historical fiction for the time, but it's a weird distinction. It's a weird place to put her books because at the time she was writing them, most of them were contemporary. So I didn't even realize that her books were supposed to be in that section, but they are. So it gets difficult to find things, and it creates all of these separations. The line gets really blurred. A lot of the time, what you end up seeing is mystery authors end up getting shelved in the fiction section, and romance books tend to get shelved in the fiction section. So the fiction section ends up becoming this mash of things that don't really make sense together. And this can also be true if you separate, there's a bookstore I know that separates translated literature. I don't like it because it's in a completely different part of the store than the regular fiction section. So one day I happened to be looking for, and I don't remember who the author was, but it is an author who had written a translated book, and I didn't see it on their shelf. So I asked them if they had it, and it turned out there's a translated literature section in a completely different section of the store, and I would never have thought to look there. Now, on the one hand, it is nice that they have a section that will highlight translated fiction and maybe they can help promote it to people. But if you're just browsing and you don't know it exists, it's a weird experience. And it's kind of annoying as a browser. So my first bookish or literary pet peeve is stores that separate fiction and sort of literature or literary fiction, because again, it's a difficult experience as a browser. It means you have to visit more sections, and it makes it more difficult to know where a book is going to be in the store. It really blurs the line, and the sections start to feel like a jumble and they don't make sense. Also at Book Exchange, because it's literature and not fiction or not literary fiction, there's nonfiction mixed in. For example, when I was looking for a copy of 84 Charing Cross Road earlier this year, I didn't know what section it was supposed to be in, so I asked them, and it should be in literature. It's a nonfiction book, but they put it in the literature section. So again, it just creates the sense of I don't really know where things go in this store, so I need to rely on an employee to tell me where to look. And not that I'm opposed to asking an employee, it's annoying. And I also think it tends to reinforce stereotypes we have about literature and what should be taken seriously, and I don't like that. So that's my first bookish or literary pet peeve. The second one is sort of an extension of that, but it's something that I try to talk about and think about a lot since I started a BookTube channel. It's reviews that act as if there's only one correct opinion about a book. I really don't like that at all. I've seen a lot of reviews and videos on BookTube that say things along the lines of like, if you don't like this book, then you're not really understanding it. You should blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, maybe you just don't like the book. I mean, sure, it's true. Maybe somebody didn't understand a book and that's why they didn't like it. But maybe you just don't like it. And that's fine. I have seen reviews that call the book, it's like, well, I know a lot of people like this, but it's embarrassingly bad. It's like, well, how can it be embarrassingly bad if a lot of people like it? You didn't like it. That's fine. You're allowed to not like it, but don't act like people who like it are incorrect. And the same is true for something else. Like, if you like something that other people don't like, you're not the only person who understood that book, because I've also seen that trope sort of deployed. You know, basically, whether or not you like a book has a lot to do with your opinion of the book. And this is, you fall into the same debate when it comes to book prizes, because people are like, well, they really got it wrong this year. It's like, well, that's your opinion. Their opinion was that this is the best. And I know I tend to fall into this trap sometimes because I react to a lot of book prizes, and like the Netanyahus, perfect recent example of a case where I think the Pulitzer jury got it wrong by not including other books. I really just didn't like the Netanyahus. They clearly did. And there are a lot of other people who did. People have commented on that video I did about the Netanyahus to say that they got a lot out of it and that they learned stuff from it. And that's great. Personally, it's not what I would have given the Pulitzer. But anyone who agrees with it is fine. You know, there are things in the world that are actual fact. And it's difficult to have this conversation now because I feel like it's like politics in the United States has become this like alternative facts style thing where there is something that is factually true. Like, let's just go there. Donald Trump lost the last presidential election, and yet there are a lot of people who will try to tell you that's actually not true. It was stolen from him, but that factually he lost. So there are certain circumstances where there is a fact and that is what it is. And not believing it is just kind of lunacy. This is not that. This is opinion. And everybody's allowed to have one. And you know, sometimes your opinion of a book might change. My classic example of this is Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. The first time I read that book, I was somewhere around 21, 22, something like that. And I thought it was good. But I remember thinking, I don't know why this won a Pulitzer, though. It's not great. It's fine. I really liked Housekeeping instead because I was closer to my teenage years. Housekeeping is a sort of coming-of-age novel. It resonated a lot better with me. But thinking about it over time, it's like, well, Housekeeping is kind of a flawed book. And actually, Gilead is kind of wonderful. It's the book that I said was the best book published in the last 25 years. I'll have that video linked down below. And that's something that I have learned to appreciate better as I have gotten older. You know, it's a book that is about aging and dying and fatherhood and a little bit about religion. What did I know about those things when I was 21? I know a lot about it now that I'm 41. And that's okay. I was sort of on a journey with that book. The first time I read it, I wasn't really in a place to take in and absorb everything that it was telling me. So I didn't like it, or I didn't think I liked it. Was I wrong? No. I have a different understanding of it now, and it makes it a book that I really appreciate. So, you know, even my own opinion, like if I had been telling people, oh, you're wrong about Gilead, it's a terrible book, I would feel embarrassed now because I have a different understanding of that book. Point just being, if I really like a book, that's fine if you don't like it. Like one thing I've come across, I talk about The Plague of Doves a lot, The Poisonwood Bible a lot, Demon Copperhead a lot. And there are people who don't like those books. I really do. And that's fine. But I also sometimes, like in my Pulitzer reaction, there would occasionally be comments when A Demon Copperhead co-won the Pulitzer, there'd be comments that would say, no, that's actually a terrible book. It's like, well, that's your opinion. I like it. It would be more interesting to have a conversation about what are the things about Demon Copperhead that you did not like. That was a more interesting conversation, because certainly there are things about it that people will not like. There are things about it that I loved. I'd rather have a conversation about that than have somebody just flat out tell me you're wrong about that book. Because no, I'm actually not. And you're not wrong either. It's just opinion. And it's okay for people to have different opinions of a book, because these are not life or death matters. Nobody is right. Nobody is wrong. It's fine. It's fine. And people get very defensive about these things. And I just, again, I feel like you're allowed to like things, and that's okay. I don't need to try to come in and be like, you're wrong, you shouldn't like these things, here are the things you should actually like. Why would I want to do that? It's something that is okay, and it drives me nuts when I see it. So there you go. That is my second bookish or literary pet peeve. The third thing, kind of along the same lines, it's debating whether or not an audiobook counts as reading, or feeling like you need to emphasize that there's a difference between listening to an audiobook and reading a physical book. The reason I have such a hard time with this is that, yes, listening to an audiobook is reading. It is not an invalid form of reading. Yes, it's not literally picking up a book and doing the physical act of reading. But if you listen to an audiobook, you are taking in all of the information that the book has to offer. And people sometimes really want to get into all of the little details and have debates. It's like, well, you know, a good narrator could make you like a book more than you would if you just picked it up in print. Yeah, that's true. But you could have a bad day and pick up a physical book and just be not even realize that you're kind of mad at the world or you're in a bad mood, and it will impact your experience of the book. Things will happen in your life that could impact your experience of a book. Just because you're listening as opposed to holding the book in your hands doesn't invalidate the experience of the book. And the reason it bothers me when people emphasize that there's a difference is that when you do that, it comes across as ableism, for one thing, because there are people who need to listen to audiobooks. I've known people who are dyslexic, who have a much easier time listening to audiobooks than they do reading a book, for extremely valid reasons. There are people who have trouble with their eyesight or have arthritis and have difficulty holding a book, especially a really big, heavy book. Audiobooks are better for them. So if you keep emphasizing the fact that, well, listening to an audiobook is different, it's just different, it's a different experience, what you are telling them, whether you intend to or not, is that this is the right way to do it, and that's the wrong way. And I don't like that, as I feel like we have probably established at this point. It's fine. If people want to listen to an audiobook, it's okay. They are not going to have a lesser experience of the book than they would if they picked up the book. And, you know, I don't want people to think that the experiences are all that different, because every person is unique. And it's just like in school. People have different ways of learning. It doesn't mean somebody's dumb or stupid if they don't learn the same way that you do. Some people are very visual. Some people do a lot better with listening. Some people do a mix of both. When I was in school, I did really well if I listened and took notes. So the act of listening and writing out really helped me remember. And that's why I had a tendency to do well on tests in high school, because I knew that was a system that worked for me, and I did it. Some people that doesn't work. My foster son, it wasn't a system that worked for him, and that's fine. So it's just, you know, people have different speeds, structures, ways of taking information in, and that's fine. Emphasizing a difference inherently implies that one is better than the other, and I don't like it. So that's my third bookish or literary pet peeve, something that I don't like. Now let's get into things that are more about specific products or books or ways books are manufactured, presented, and get away from the sort of everything everybody does is fine, because I believe that. But let's get away from that type of thing and get into more unimportant things that tend to bother me. The first one has to do with movie tie-ins and book club stickers. Now, again, it's fine if something is a movie tie-in. This is actually the only movie tie-in that I own. It's Ironweed by William Kennedy. This was one of the Pulitzer Prize novels, and I found this at my library. It was on sale for $1, so I bought it. And this is a very innocuous version of a movie tie-in, because you could look at this and think that was just the cover of the book. It's actually a movie poster. That is Meryl Streep. That is Jack Nicholson, or that is supposed to be Jack Nicholson. It could very well not be Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson. It could be people standing in for them, because who knows, maybe their schedules were busy and they couldn't pose for the poster. It would seem weird to have Jack Nicholson and not show his face. But anyway, this was something that was created for the movie adaptation that was made in the 80s. It's the only movie tie-in that I own, so therefore it's the only one that I can hold up and show you. I tend to feel, and this is my own weird thing, like if I'm going to read Ironweed, it's for my Pulitzer Prize project. The fact that there is a movie has nothing to do with why I want to read it. So I'd rather just have the book cover. Usually I am drawn to a book for a different reason, and then if there is a movie coming up, it might just speed up my process of reading it. It's very rare for a movie to make me want to read a book. Like just the existence of a movie to make me want to read a book. But by and large, I just don't want a movie poster. You know, all book covers are marketing. It's just a fact. But I'd rather have the book cover and not the movie cover. Like, I don't care if people think I read something because a movie exists anymore. I'm not, I grew out of that over time. But I just feel like I would rather have the actual book cover. And again, this one is sort of fine because it doesn't look like it's not. There was a version of Empire Falls when the TV movie came out that had little posters of all of the actors that were in it. And it's like, I don't want that version of that book. So that's movie tie-ins. Then there are book club stickers. Now, I know a lot of people get really into this, so I don't like them, but by and large, it's fine. And the one that pops up the most is actually the Oprah sticker. She tends to select books for her book club that I'm already interested in reading. Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, which I'm pointing to right here, has an Oprah sticker on it. It's hard to say. I think the first time I heard about this book was when it was announced as an Oprah book, but it was actually the reviews of it that made me want to read it. So the existence of the Oprah sticker, which, by the way, is also on Nightcrawling by Layla Motley right here, doesn't make me want to read it. It just happens that I tend to want to read a lot of books that end up selected for her book club. So I don't actually care too much about the Oprah sticker, which, by the way, is not actually a sticker because it's on the cover. It's part of the design, so you can never remove that. I don't really have other examples of this. When I was a member of Book of the Month Club, those are all branded, and that was a little annoying to me, but I was a member of the club, so it's their right to do that. But it was a little annoying to me. The one that really drives me nuts, and I would try to avoid if at all possible, is the Read with Jenna book club, because I'm just not a fan of the Bush family, as you can probably imagine, and I think it's a little bit weird the way NBC over time has propped up members of the Bush family and given them jobs in media, and of course Donald Trump as well. But let's not get into that. So that is the only book club sticker that I would sort of actively avoid, and it has nothing to do with the quality of the book. And it has much more to do with the person who's choosing it. And that's my weird, shallow thing. I tend to avoid movie tie-ins, and if at all possible, I would prefer to avoid the Read with Jenna. I'm fine with the Oprah logo, the Reese's Book Club. Like, it's fine. But I would, if possible, prefer ones that don't have them. It's just that usually once they select them, you can't get away from them. Oh, the next thing is actually, I was reaching for a book, but it's actually, I don't know, will this be controversial? It's tote bags. So I have one bookstore tote bag right here. It's from Good Neighbor Bookstore in New York. I don't know if you can see the logo. It's a little wrinkled because I have stuff in this. So I use this tote bag as I'm going through my shelves. If I find a book that I feel like I want to trade in at my local used bookstore, I'll put it in here. And then once a month or whenever I have enough books in here, I'll take a trip to my local used bookstore and see if they will take any of those books that I have traded in. So this tote has a purpose. But people go crazy for tote bags. They get really excited for tote bags. And I am not about them. Like, I have this one. And if you want to be technical, they're not actually tote bags. They're reusable grocery bags, but I have 2 of those in my car. They just kind of live there so I can use them for groceries. Technically, they're tote bags. So I have 3 tote bags. That's enough. I don't need any more. And a lot of times, because I collect bookstore t-shirts from independent bookstores. A lot of times I have gone into independent bookstores and asked, do you have t-shirts? And they say, no, but we have totes. And I'm like, I love that for you. I'm going to wait for a t-shirt. Like actually my local used bookstore, Book Exchange, they do not have t-shirts, but they sell totes. And I just don't want a tote. I don't know what people do with all of the tote bags that they collect. But again, if you have a lot of tote bags, if you want to have so many tote bags that you can choose one for your mood or to match your outfit, good for you. That is a thing you are allowed to do. It is not the way I live my life. I have my one bookstore tote that I use for my used bookstore so I can trade things in, and then the 2 for the groceries, and that's it. I'm done. I don't need any more. Let's get to my final literary or bookish pet peeve, which is deckled edges. I know I'm not the only one on this one. Part of the thing I don't like about deckled edges is that it is purely an aesthetic choice. If you make a book with deckled edges, I don't know if you can see this, by the way. So a deckled edge is when the pages are not even at the end. It makes it look antique. It's an aesthetic choice at this point. Like, a book doesn't have to look like this. There are people who think it looks pretty, and sure, it looks pretty. But by and large, this is the part of the book you're going to be looking at, not this. And especially on paperbacks. So I specifically chose a deckled edge on a paperback because sometimes if you're flipping, it's just a little more difficult. And if you're trying to flip, like I'm doing, I feel like I'm ending up looking like one of those people in an infomercial who just arbitrarily can't do something and is making it look difficult. But like, it's just a little bit more difficult to turn the pages, especially when you're in the short end of the deckled edge. And for whatever reason, it's a little more difficult. And because they don't need to be that way, it's a mild source of annoyance for me. So deckled edges. I know I'm not alone on that one. Let's get to some bookish and literary things that I love and focus on some positive energy to close this out. The first thing is a book with a map, which is not going to surprise anyone who follows along. I love a book with a map. I love finding a book. So this is something I found at Brews Books in Pullman, Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. I already knew I was going to buy it, because this is a book that I would like, but it's just a really fun edition of it. I love the cover. I love the photos on the back. So I was already sold. And then you open it and you see this glorious map of their travels. And it makes me so happy. I love a book with a map. I love it. I love it. I love it. It just makes me so excited when I find them. You usually see them in sci-fi or fantasy books. I have 2 examples from sci-fi or fantasy books. Here is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, which is about people on a journey. So of course there's a map, and usually you find it in sci-fi and fantasy books because there is a world that the author has created and it gives you a sense of how that world is laid out. Here is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, and there's the map. It's just very fun whenever you run into it. So it gives me a little gasp, a little joy, and I am always happy every time I run into it. The next bookish or literary thing that just gives me joy is along a similar line. It's illustrations. Like, part of what I love about this Franklin Library editions, I have many Pulitzer Prize Franklin Library editions because up to the early 80s, They did every book that has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction in these Franklin Library editions, and I've collected most of them. Part of why I love them is that they all have really beautiful illustrations. They hired artists for each book, usually different artists, and this book actually does not open very wide. This is Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday. So they got an artist to do sort of Native American inspired art, and they embossed the jacket with Native American inspired art, which I really hope actually means something to the plot. But it's just particularly nice because this is something that was specially commissioned for this book. And, you know, it's something that we don't do that much anymore. Like, sure, this is a special edition of it, but it's just a really fun thing to do. I love the look of it, and it just gives me a lot of joy. Now I'm going to go back to this edition of My Antonia by Willa Cather. This is from the Penguin Great Books of the 20th Century. They did these around the year 2000, just selecting out some great books that had been published. And I used to collect them. I only have a small handful of them anymore. The reason I'm bringing it back up is that the thing that gives me joy is not the deckled edges. We've already covered that I don't like that. It's paperback books with French flaps. I just love it. It's a really fun way of incorporating information. So usually on a paperback, you have the marketing blurb, like the summary of the plot on the back of the book. But when you have a French flap, you can put it right there, just as if it's a hardcover. You can have the information about the author on the back. So what they did on the Penguin Great Books of the 20th Century is they have a photo of the author and the first line of the book on the back, and then you have the information there. The other thing, it just feels fancy to me, and it is functional. So it's not like the deckled edge that looks fancy but isn't really functional. This is just, it has a nice purpose. And the other thing that really is nice about it is that it gives the book a little bit more substance. So this doesn't feel like a flimsy paperback. It feels like a book that was really well made, is really sturdy, and is going to last a long time. And part of that is you have this extra material on it, and it's just really great. So that is another thing that gives me joy whenever you find it. Not enough paperbacks do that. The next bookish or literary thing that gives me joy is when an author's books have a similar look. This is a little difficult because a lot of the times when I have books by a specific author that don't match, it's because I've gotten most of them from a used bookstore. So I'll put up a photo of my Toni Morrison books here, and because this is a prime example. There are editions of her books that match, and I have some of them, but by and large, they don't really match. In this case, there are editions of the book that would match. They're just not the ones that I have. Now I'm going to put up a photo of my Louise Erdrich books because I actually have like two different piles. So I'll put up both piles, starting with maybe the paperback one. This is an author who has been publishing since the 1980s, and for whatever reason, they've never even attempted to really make them have a similar look. Maybe they will at some point in the future, but they don't. Her last two books, The Night Watchman and The Sentence, do kind of have a similar look on the spine, but by and large, they are kind of all over the place in terms of what they look like. And then we'll go to the hardcovers as well. And again, part of this is because I have pretty deliberately gotten all of my copies from a used bookstore. So there are editions that kind of look similar, but they just by and large don't look alike at all. What I love is like James Baldwin, these editions of his book. Immediately you can see these on my shelf and you know those are James Baldwin's books. They are all by the same author and I love it. And what I really like about these is the lines are in the same place. You probably can't see it. I didn't pull them down. There are books right here by Mark Harris. The only one of them that I've actually read is Bang the Drum Slowly, but I have the other books in that series. And at the top, there's an illustration of, I think it's a baseball. The illustration is just slightly off on all of them, and it's just a little weird. So the thing I like about these James Baldwin books is the design is evenly matched on all of them, and it just immediately signals to someone these books belong with each other. I actually forgot one of the James Baldwin books. So yeah, you can tell immediately those books belong together. They are by the same author. That is their section on the shelf. And I haven't read John Updike, but I'm not really quite looking forward to them. But again, this is even better because these are part of a series. So right off the bat, you can see like those are by the same author. Those are probably related books on the shelf. It just gives me a little bit of joy whenever you run into that. The next thing that gives me joy is a book with footnotes, fiction book with footnotes, because it's not uncommon to run into a nonfiction book that has footnotes. The classic example is The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, a Pulitzer Prize winning book. So in this book, the footnotes tease out the history of the Dominican Republic and specifically a dictator, Trujillo. And it ties into the plot, but it allows Junot Diaz not to get bogged down in the history, because every time you run into a footnote, it will sort of explain the backstory that is driving the story forward, even though this is a story that is kind of fantastic and involves a curse. But it has footnotes that really just give you a lot of information. And sometimes you'll have a book that has footnotes that give you fictional information, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Your mileage may vary on this book. It's a big brick of a book. I remember being extremely bored when I read this, but the history of magic is teased out throughout this book in a fictional way. It also has illustrations, which is, again, just gives me a lot of joy. So as much as I was kind of bored, here is a footnote there. This footnotes tease out this history of magic that Susanna Clarke just created, and it's wild and it's interesting and it's kind of fun, and I love it. The final thing that I just get joy out of in the book world are vintage or pulp, usually mass market book covers, even just sort of vintage 70s and 80s illustrations on one of these mass markets. I have a couple of examples to show you. The first is The Voice at the Back Door. Somebody had told me about this book because it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and it's actually the book that the jury recommended for the Pulitzer Prize that year, but it didn't win. And there's going to be a whole thing when I actually look into that year. No book was selected to win that year. And when I looked it up, I saw this edition, which is a sort of vintage pulp cover. And the pulp covers are intended to look sort of action-packed, very sexual or sensual, really like lurid designs that will lure you in. And this one is particularly wild because this is a very serious novel that is being treated like a disposable pulp story. I had to have this copy of the book, but it turns out it's kind of flimsy. This is not an edition that I would have to read, so I had to get a different copy that I will be able to read. But I love that style of design. I already had 2 different copies of A Confederacy of Dunces when I saw this at my local used bookstore, and I had to have it anyway because look at this vintage, almost flirting with pulp design on the cover. It's just so much fun. I love it. So I had to have it. Here are some just sort of vintage covers. This is from Shirley Ann Grau, who is in the Pulitzer family of authors. She won for The Keepers of the House. This is The Hard Blue Sky. Look how 70s and 80s this feels. It just really takes you back. And it's just a fun way of presenting a book. Pat Conroy, the great Santini, this really heavily illustrated style that you used to see on books a lot. It just is always fun and interesting to me. And then another Pulitzer book, Humboldt's Gift by Saul Bellow. This very 70s, really dated illustration style. So just a very vintage appearance for this type of book. It gives me joy. And that's it. That's everything. Those are some bookish or literary things that annoy me, or just pet peeves if you want, and some bookish or literary things that I love. I'd love to hear what are your literary pet peeves and things that give you joy in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.